Do I agree or disagree? Well, when I was there, we had guest speakers. People in the African American Studies department would come and give lectures. Some people in that department were white, and they came as my guest to give really, really interesting lectures. And they talked about, hey, why aren't there more white people, studying African American studies? These are people with literally PhDs in African American studies teaching on the Cal campus. Okay, Professor Cohen, who did his undergrad work at Yale. I took race in film with him on the Cal campus. It's one of my favorite classes to ever take. Okay, this guy came and gave a guest lecture. Under this rule, this professor, who was beloved on the Cal campus and has incredible credentials and teaches an awesome class and everybody likes it. This professor, who has a black wife and children who are half black, would not be allowed to come to this house.
Right.
Even if he were invited by another person. Same thing when it comes to people that were GSIs, grad students, getting their PhD in African American studies. I invited another guy, I believe his first name was Chris. I can look up what his last name was, but he was getting his PhD in African American studies, did his undergrad at Harvard, white guy who was going to also come in and talk about, some very interesting stuff. He just happens to be white, but it was really cool. This guy was getting a PhD in AFAM. Now, did I only invite white people? No, I invited, all kinds of people, anybody who had cool ideas that I figured folks would be interested in. I invited them. Now, why am I saying I did this? Because I was the social chair, just so y'all understand why. I was responsible for programming and shit. So on one side, you can say, well, these white people should understand that they're not allowed to do this. You should just find another avenue. I get that. On the other hand, I'm also wondering, how much of this is actually necessary and how much of this is just people wanting to make a name for themselves. So I disagree with it, but I don't believe that disagreement should necessarily mean the school should come in or the co-op system should come in and force them to change it. I still believe in house autonomy over everything.
Why is that?
I believe the house should be able to make their rules. And if that's a rule they want, that is fine. And it is up to the people in the house to make a stronger argument to change that rule. And I believe this is just going to be a rule for a year or two. And then other students are going to come in and say, you know what, this is dumb. And they'll vote to change it. It's not a permanent rule. They can change it at any point in time. So I don't believe they should be compelled to change the rule. I believe you don't fight bad ideas by forcing people to change. I think you fight bad ideas with better ideas.
What if a house had said that they wanted to create a safe space for just white people?
Same thing.
Acceptable?
I don't think that would be allowed to fly, practically speaking. But as far as I'm concerned, if a house votes for that, house autonomy should overrule everything. Now, I believe, the rest of the cooperative system would boycott your party so you can't raise any more money. People the rest of the cooperative system would say that house is the racist house. Nobody would want to live there because you'll be labeled as a racist there. So, that rule would only stand up for a little bit because no one would want to be associated with that house anymore. You're allowed to do that and adopt your rule, but other people are allowed to have their reaction to it. And that's a whole other
thing. You can do whatever you want as long as you're ready to embrace the fact that people are allowed to have a reaction to it.
Exactly. And so
we forget that in this sphere of desperation for autonomy. Okay, in your quest to live your best life, people also have the right to have a reaction to that they feel fits in the parameters of their best life.
Boom.
Right? To Dave Chappelle's point, my verbal hero, to what extent do I have to be involved in your self-expression? And is there a price for that self-expression if that self-expression tramples on what feels like the freedom of others?
That's a very good point.
And what is the need for another safe space? So the house that's going to do this safe space from whites on the Berkeley campus, what type of discussions are had there? That the need for no white people is understandable or acceptable.
One thing is white folks weren't even coming there unless they were invited anyway.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I would love to know give me the example of the thing that kicked this off. Did somebody have a white guest and then they had a discussion, and the discussion turned into a yelling match because they disagreed with something that somebody said.
Right. And we also have to
You guys
learn
were
that
right.
just because somebody disagrees with you doesn't mean you're unsafe.
Thank you.
They disagree with you. It doesn't mean that they're a card carrying KKK member who's, plotting to kidnap you and toss you into the woods to hunt you. I mean, we've got to understand that there's gradients to this shit.
Yeah. Are you so far left that you need to be protected from people who might be center left because they might disagree with you on like 1% or 10% of issues, and they agree with you with 80 to 90% of everything else?
Right. Like what qualifies someone to say I am unsafe? I mean, what type of language has to be used? Because it seemed like that language that people accuse of being unsafe, it just seems like a lot of the time it's just somebody disagreeing with you. Like you're not unsafe just because someone disagreed with you. Now, if that agreement is compounded by them supporting a right of someone being taken away, that's a different conversation. But if somebody just simply disagrees with your perspective on something, you can't necessarily assume that you are now unsafe, that you are in some way threatened.
Right.
And if we just keep surrounding ourselves with people who think like us, how does anybody learn anything?
And if you can only operate in a safe space where there are no white people, then you should have gone to an HBCU. If you are so incapacitated, so triggered to the point where you feel like white people being around you is in and of itself a form of violence, and white people who might disagree with you is a form of violence, to the point where you are so uncomfortable, you're so triggered that you need to be protected from this at all times. You need a Black only space, and that's the only way you can operate. You should have sought out a Black only space. We have those. We have several of them. They're called HBCUs.
That's true. That is true. But how are we supposed to move the needle on the dialogue if all we do is surround ourselves with people who think like us? And again, we've got to be able to separate a difference of opinion with a pattern of behavior. We've got to separate vitriol from pattern of behavior of full frontal attack on a community, right? Like there's grades to things. And I vaguely remember at one time Matt Damon was asked about something about sexual harassment. And I remember he said something like, well, there is a big difference between like the Weinsteins of the world who are raping women and somebody who like slaps your ass walking down the street. And like people like lost it. Like, oh my God, sexual assault is sexual assault. And we can't like be diluting shit. Like nobody, it's like, okay, wait a minute. I didn't say it was okay to slap somebody on the ass or bite them on whatever it is. All I'm saying is we've got to understand that there's a difference between someone who is raping women from someone who's an idiot or someone who's ignorant or someone who has clearly not been exposed. Like there are different gradients to this. And we've got to be able to discern the difference between real threats and people who are just stupid. Otherwise, we're going to see a boogeyman everywhere we go.
I think that's the point, is to see a boogeyman everywhere you go. I think
because in so doing, we never unite.
I don't think the point is to unite people. I think the point is to make a name for yourself as a radical activist.
Right.
I think the point is to be
like you're so radical, there is no uniting. The only answer left is segregation, or like, well,
Jarvis.
And maybe there is some truth to that, right? But I mean, it's going to be real hard to segregate in the middle of Berkeley.
Yeah. I honestly
especially
think
where the Black, brown, and Southeast Asian population, makes up less than 10% of the entire school population.
Black, brown, and Southeast Asian.
Yes, Southeast Asian, and I specify that for a reason. I mean, Berkeley is a white place, no matter how progressive it would like to identify itself as. It's a very white place. So if you want to start segregating, I recommend not segregating in some place that's 90% white. Like at least to your point, do an HBCU, or open up something like this in a community of color, for example, in Oakland or in Richmond. Like that if you're looking for color, that's where they are.
Right. And also, like, the Black fraternities, they don't have houses, but what they will do is like, hey, we're all going to try to like rent out this house together.
Right.
So it's not, but like, as soon as your lease, as soon as the people, you guys who are part of this fraternity, and you all graduate, that lease, it's not, the lease is not held by the fraternity or anything like that. This is just, some people who have a common bond of being part of this Greek organization who decided to rent out a house. right? And so the location of that house, the place they happen to be renting can move.
Right.
As people, grow up and leave. But yeah, if you want that, you can do that space as well.